Hello, I am David Turner, and I'm going to be presenting my summary and reflection of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And so Luke opens up with a lot of names that are not traditionally Jewish, such as like Caesar Augustus and Cyrenius. This is potentially an allusion to the fact that he's going to be speaking to a broader audience rather than just the Jews. And so after mentioning these names, he goes into the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of Jesus, which, interestingly enough, the genealogy of Jesus, according to Luke, is a little bit different than the genealogy listed in the Gospel of Matthew. The genealogy in the Gospel of Luke takes the genealogy not just from Joseph all the way back to Abraham, but rather continues and goes all the way to Adam, proving that Jesus is not just a Jew or the son of Abraham, but the son of the whole world, reaching a broader audience rather than just the Jewish community. And so after this, we go into the baptism of Jesus, which was done by John the Baptist. And here we just see the Holy Spirit descend upon Jesus, and that sort of marks the beginning of his ministry. And from there, Luke then goes into the ministry, talking about all the stories, the parables Jesus tells, the miracles he did, the lessons that he taught many people far and wide. There are a few stories that are only listed in Luke as opposed to the other Gospels. One of them being the story of the woman who washed Jesus' feet with expensive anointment. And another is famously the story of the prodigal son. And those are just a couple. There are several that are others that are also not included. But from there, as in all the Gospels, we eventually get to the trial and the crucifixion of Jesus. And eventually, we get to the resurrection of Jesus, which, differing from the other Gospels, every Gospel seems to have a different opinion of who was at the tomb when Mary arrived. In Mark, it was a young man. In Matthew, it was an angel. And in Luke, it was two angels. And speaking of the resurrection, this is where the book of Luke ends and the book of Acts then begins. The book of Acts begins with the disciples talking and communing with Jesus as he's still there after his resurrection, and he then descends, leaving his message that one greater than I, the Holy Spirit, will come down and empower you. And then the disciples go to Pentecost, and the Holy Spirit then descends on them, and they become filled with the Holy Spirit and go out ministering into many of the nations. And that's the gist of Acts, is the story and miracles and just confessions of the early church. Much of it is Peter performing miracles, people escaping prison. And as we get halfway through the book, we are introduced to a character named Saul. He is first introduced at the martyrdom of Stephen. And after that, we then see he is blinded on the road on his way to Damascus to persecute many of this new cult of the day, who we would later on call Christians. And here Saul becomes Paul. And after his miraculous meeting with Ananias, is restored his sight and begins his journey to profess the good news to the nations. And Paul, who had a very educated upbringing, is then sent into the rest of the world, predominantly the Gentile world. And as we see, because of his fondness of Greco-Roman culture, we see him having great success in cities like Ephesus and attempting it even in Athens, but not having as much success. And the second half of Acts is just about Paul going on all these mission trips and many other things. There's a couple times there we see a little bit of just debating about what the policies of the new church are, because this church is brand new. Jesus fulfilled the law, and so now they're under a new covenant. And again, the second half of the book is a lot about Paul's journeys to many different places: Rome, Thessalonica, Ephesus, Corinth, all these places. And it eventually ends with Paul's journeying to Rome. And so that concludes the book of Acts, which for the majority of it is a good historical document of how the early church operated and began and grew.